movie, Ordinary People. So what'd you think?
Quite interesting, actually.
I actually really liked it. I understand why I got Best Picture. It was a little sad, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
A little sad.
A little sad.
It really made me not like the mom.
Yeah, no.
Like
I was grade A hater on her.
I feel like in my paper I was just like bashing on her. Like, Mom,
everything about the paper was like, and the mom is the reason.
Yeah.
She is.
Well, let's see if we can get you away from that.
Yeah, I know. Like just like initially. That was not my
I was just
favorite.
like, wow.
Like, but when you first watch it, that's what like you think. You're just like, wow, she's a grouch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's the problem with this family? What's their stressor?
Well,
They lost Bucky.
They lost their oldest son, right?
Yeah.
And is that the only one?
No, other children tried to commit suicide.
So we've got actually two, we may call it vertical stressors because they happen as a consequence of each other. So the death of Bucky and then the suicide of the son together were two corresponding stressors. So if we look at Bucky's death, what kind of stressor is that?
Oh, it's
Internal, external?
internal.
Internal? Okay. And so what are the consequences of an internal stressor?
Maybe I said it was an external in my paper. Dang it. I think my paper I said it was an external.
Yeah, but
Because I think it was like caused by external forces, and I think that was my thinking. But looking at like this model, I think it might be more of like an internal because it redefines the structural makeup of the family.
Right. So it's not like they lost something that they all shared. Mm-hmm. They lost one of their own members, right?
Yeah.
So I think you'd have to say it's an internal stressor.
Yeah.
And what are the consequences of it being an internal stressor that you saw in the movie?
oh, as far as like this separate, like mom distancing herself away from Conrad, like that? Is that what you're
Yeah, possibly.
And I felt like the mother anyways, like was closer to her husband than she was to Conrad, but also put on like a front, to other people. Like she was always happier,
Okay.
I feel like she was very superficially close to the husband.
Like that was her,
So the fundamental thing that his death did was, well, one thing, it took him out of the family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he's not there. That means they have to make an adjustment, right? And the second thing is that his death caused a diminution of their resources in the family by having the kind of impact it did on the other family members, particularly Beth and Conrad, right? All right. So Conrad, what was his? That's also an internal stressor, right? So we're getting an accumulation of stressor events that comes about because of the death and a lack of dealing with the death, both on the part of Beth and Conrad. And then that leads to Conrad developing a depression, just probably eating away at family dynamics. We don't see it at that point. Suicide, and then coming back into the family. But at no point did they ever resolve anything with the loss of Buck, right?
No. And I feel like the dad, since we don't see like the funeral or like him grieving at all, but we can kind of like infer that he did more grieving and like actually like coping and then like understanding the loss. I felt like he was able to try and understand his son and where he was coming from and Beth and tried to hold the family a little bit together.
Yeah, and it's a good observation that he is the only one. We think of the resources, especially the psychological resources. He's the only one that's bringing anything to resolve their problems. And even that, because he's one person, he's really restricted in what he can do, right?
Yeah.
What other aspects of the stressor event did you see, besides it being internal? Was it clear or ambiguous? This is a tough one. The death of Buck. Clear or ambiguous?
I'm kind of confused on what you mean by that. Like, is it clear, like...
He died and there was problems?
Yeah.
Because it did affect, like, outside the family home, too. Like, you see Beth, I think it was her brother or whoever, like, she snaps at him and then Conrad's friends at school, like they were affected by it too, and like his relationship with them was affected because didn't he get held back or something?
Yeah, because of he was taking like all junior classes and they were all taking senior classes,
Yeah.
and then they kind of talk about that in
So
the car.
is that what you're asking about clear ambiguity?
Kind of, yes. That even though it looks like it's a clear event,
Yeah.
I mean, died, he's gone. But in some ways, without resolving it, it becomes an ambiguous event.
Oh, like you don't know where it actually started from?
Did he really leave? Is Buck really gone from this family?
Oh, I get it. Okay.
Is he really gone?
Oh.
I would say no.
Yeah,
I would
'cause
say he's
that's
not
like
very gone.
Like that's what they like. Their problem, like Conrad, you know, is still having problems with his brother being gone. Like that happening is still a part of him. His mother is still, that was like her child, you know.
Yeah.
And then
And she like sits in his room, like they're not ready to like move on.
And his wound's
make
kept
that
intact.
exactly the same as probably the day that he died, and they're just not willing to give up that image of that family that they were when he was alive.
Yeah. So in that sense, it's ambiguous, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, is he here or is he not? And in fact, there's a really good term for this. It's called boundary ambiguity. We talked about boundary ambiguity before. Remember I talked about divorce homes and how that often creates boundary ambiguity when there's a shared child? Well, in this case, it's an internal boundary ambiguity. Well, or an external one as well, but it's called, there are two kinds of this boundary ambiguity. One is called being physically absent, but psychologically present.
Okay.
So he's there,
Yeah.
but he's not there, right? So it's ambiguous. It creates a boundary ambiguity in that regard. If we go back and we look at Conrad's problem, is that a clear problem, or is it ambiguous? I mean, it's internal, right? But is it clear or ambiguous?
Could it be ambiguous in the fact that he's physically there but he's not mentally there, kind of thing? Is
Yeah.
that can be another sense of the
That's another kind of
ambiguity?
boundary ambiguity.
Okay.
Physically present, psychologically absent.
Yeah.
You know, he's there in place, and the interaction happens around him, but he's often not there. And he's often pulled away from the family, probably because he also doesn't want to deal with the issue of Buck's death, and he has to withdraw from family dynamics to some degree in order to preserve this guilt that he feels for his death, right? And then we see that resolved in the end. So we can see some of the aspects of the stressor event. Internal, it's more or less ambiguous. It looks clear on the one side, but it's ambiguous on another. The ambiguity with regard to Conrad also comes about because it's a mental illness. People don't understand mental illness, and so they don't understand what it's about. And he went to the hospital, and he was thought to be cured. But he's not really cured, right?
Yeah, well, that's like his mother. Like his mother, she didn't understand, like him going to the psychiatrist or
Right.
Dr. Berger, whoever.
Yeah.
But his dad was really like, okay, you know, like what'd you talk about, blah blah. And like even like his mother, like was it her mom? Yeah.
Yeah.
Was
yeah.
talking to her mom in the kitchen about.
I thought all that business was taken care of. or
Yeah,
something, right?
like, you know, like
Yeah.
it was just another page in the book for her.
Right.
Pretty much.
Yeah, and I think that had something kind of to do with like her communication with Conrad at all. Like she was just totally checked out of what was going on in his life and where he mentally was and how stable or unstable he was. And so I think that that's kind of why she's like, well, why does he need to go there? It's all taken care of. And she didn't get that he wasn't.
In some ways, the father doesn't either. He wants him to go to the psychiatrist because he doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and he understands there's a problem, but he doesn't understand the nature of the problem. He doesn't understand what the treatment's about, and what he goes to the psychiatrist to find out what the status of his son is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But I feel like he actually did take a step towards.
Yeah, he was closer to
Yeah,
it than she
like,
was.
You know, actually making
Right.
an effort.
And you can see in the beginning when the father, like, after they go to that, like, dinner party or whatever, they come home and they're driving home and Conrad's light's on and he's, like, pretending to read and the dad comes in and he's still having nightmares and he, like, lies. Like, I think he's aware that something's not always right with his son, like, and I think that's kind of why he kind of brings up the psychiatry thing, like, later on at the dinner table to, like, call him because he knows he's, like, it's not going
Yeah.
away.
But he's fighting in a sense, to create a family recognition that there's something wrong,
Yeah.
right? He can't do it, though, unless he brings Beth along.
Yeah.
Because reality is defined within the context of the family. So he's like stuck. He says, there's something wrong, but maybe there isn't anything wrong, or I have to convince Beth that there's something wrong. Otherwise, my knowing it's worthless,
Yeah.
right? So I think there's an element there. So internal, pretty ambiguous, and that's pretty much the case with mental illness. As we said earlier, it's usually an ambiguous stressor. It makes it really hard to tackle the issue. If you don't understand that there's an issue, if you don't understand what's going on, if you don't recognize it, then that's an ambiguous situation. And that's going to really impact so that's the kind of event situation. It's going to really impact the perceptions of the event, the perceptions of the situation. And this family has got problems all over the place in terms of perceiving that they even have a stressor in their life, right? And it's going to limit the number of resources that can be brought to bear on the situation. You don't know what's wrong, so how do you use your resources to fix it? Although, again, the father's recognition is empowering the son to go and find psychiatrist care, and that's a big resource that they have. Lots of money, right?
Yeah, because he was like, "Oh, it's $50 2 times
Yeah.
a week," and I was like,
That's not an issue.
Yeah.
That's right. So internal, ambiguous. What other aspects of the stressor event can you call? Internal, ambiguous. Is it voluntary or involuntary? That's a tough one too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bucky's death was pretty involuntary. No?
I don't think when they show the scene, I don't think that there's a lot that Conrad could have done to save him. So I think it was
Right.
kind of he didn't really have a choice. It was kind of just this is happening for him, whether he likes it or not. So yeah, I'd say that one is very involuntary.
Only Conrad thought he had a choice, but nobody else thought he had a choice. No one was really blaming him for
"No."
other than himself, right?
Yeah, because he says in one of his sessions, Dr. Berger was just like, "And what are you blaming yourself for, or whatever?" And he was like, "Letting go or something, or no, holding on."
For holding
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, for holding
Yeah.
on. So
But then what about his mental illness? Now that becomes not somewhat voluntary, or not so involuntary. In this community, it's perceived to be pretty voluntary, isn't it? Like people commit suicide. They chose it.
Yeah.
yeah,
I feel like it's really, really.
Although the family didn't choose it, I should say. So I guess we'd have to say it's involuntary in that sense.
And I think
Because
maybe
the family didn't choose to go through the suicide.
no, and I feel like. I mean, not that this is real, but I feel like that if the family had coped more with his death, that maybe the suicide wouldn't have happened. So it could possibly be voluntary in the fact that they set themselves up for this.
Yeah. Except that
Other
voluntary
stressor.
would be that you choose to do this. You choose to do it, not that you neglect to not do it. So I think we'd have to say it's involuntary, which should help them cope with it to some degree. Then what else do we have? So internal, ambiguous, involuntary, normative, and non-normative.
Those ones I keep getting confused.
Normative.
Normative
or
is like a
non-normative?
child going to high school, and non-normative is the arrest, right? I'd say it's non-normative.
Yeah, certainly a death by drowning, an accidental drowning of a young child. That's not everyone goes through that. Not that it's illegitimate, but non-normative in the sense that
Doesn't have it
there's
there.
no real clear pathway. Nobody knows how to deal with the fact that they had a child that died. Right? What does Beth say in the golf? Went to her golfing companion,
Well,
something like.
Her brother. And
She
goes
says something
off
like,
on her.
"Well, you tell me how you'd be happy when you've lost a son."
yeah,
Nobody knows. And so it really limits, again, in the resource end of things, because if you consider to be networks as important resources for dealing with stressor events, if it's non-normative, you don't have that level of network capacity to help you deal with it. unless you can go to professionals who deal with those incidental events that don't happen to everybody. And then, of course, the suicide is definitely non-normative, right? I mean, not only do most families don't experience that, but it has, the added element of a non-normative event of being illegitimate. The idea that someone would commit suicide. We generally don't accept suicide in our society.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's especially for Beth and her little, it seems like her perfect little world minus,
Absolutely.
like that
Good
is something,
point.
it's almost, I think it almost looks embarrassing to her.
Yes.
Even when her friends bring up that, oh, Conrad quit the swim team, like, I don't think she really cared at all that he quit the swim team. She was just like, oh, Beth didn't know, So I think it's, yeah.
Well, or even more powerful, the idea that in this community where they live, why was she embarrassed? Because, and we'll come back to this when we talk, I'll go through the different external context elements, but the cultural context here is one of personal responsibility and one of you do it, you succeed, you don't bail out, right? This is an upper middle class, successful, competitive community. This is one of the wealthiest suburbs of Chicago. And they're, the goal is you have to stay there. And so anybody who does something like commit suicide is really sort of spitting in the face of this community. Like, this is not acceptable. You can't do it.
Yeah,
You're not allowed.
I think also that it kind of, maybe this is just how I see it, it relays like a message back that the parents maybe aren't doing their job. Like whenever I've had like seen suicide in families, I don't want to think this, but I always think, what happened for that person to do that? Like maybe someone wasn't like doing enough, or
Yeah, maintaining an image of being a family, probably very strong family values, a sense that families should function properly. Parents should be good parents to their children, and there's everything there for them to be successful. There's a great high school, and they even have a swim team. A lot of high schools even have a swim team, right? Never mind a pool. And so there's this sense that if he fails, that not only is it an illegitimate act on his part, but it illegitimizes the family as well. Yeah, and so Beth really takes it as an affront that he did that without telling her. It's almost not even important that he didn't tell her. It's just that he quit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she's like, and his dad's like, well, why didn't you tell us? She's like, he did it because of me. He wanted to hurt me. And he's like, what are you talking
At that point,
about?
I was like, quit being a drama queen.
Yeah.
You.
It's not all about you, Beth.
Yeah.
Good. Cumulative? Yeah, definitely. Well, it becomes cumulative, right?
Yeah.
The death continues on, and it spurs other stressors that result in this family really breaking down. Okay. So this family experienced stress and crisis as a result of the stressor event? Well, it's a little bit tough. Stress for sure. Maybe crisis at the end, but the crisis is almost a way of fixing it.
I think so too.
Do you think?
It's like that peak before it like gets better. Like that's the crisis, and then it
Yeah.
the
Good.
solving.
Yeah, you drop to the bottom and then reorganize. And we don't see how they reorganize, but we see them dropping to the bottom, and that's the crisis point. Before they get to the crisis point, I mean, the whole movie is a movie of a family in stress, right? When we talked about what's stress, remember we said stress is the inability to achieve your goals, right? The inability of things to work the way they normally do. Well, to a large, I mean, this family is doing the things. They have supper every night. They maintain, their son goes to school. They have a Christmas celebration of sorts. There's this sort of we're getting by, and that's the tension in the whole movie, right? That's why it's such a great movie. Why it won the Academy Award, because I mean, how do you do that over a sustained hour and a half of showing this family in constant tension? And that's that tension. It can't move. It's it's in stress and the ways it's handling the stress. So we go to the double part of the double ABCX model, is it's coping, right? This is a family that's coping. It's getting by. And how is it coping?
Very well.
No, but what is
Oh.
it doing to cope? What do they do to cope?
They just don't talk about it.
They don't talk about
I
it.
was gonna say it's just absent. Like,
Yeah.
They engage in, it's absent. What do you mean?
I mean, like, for so like you see in the garage when Calvin finally brings up to Beth about Bucky's funeral and whatnot. Like she said like they have never talked about it before. Why are we talking about it? You know, like, so
Yeah.
it's almost like not that they forget or they want to forget. It's just that they just never bring it up.
Right. They're avoiding those kinds of, that affective element of life.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, they're not achieving their emotional goals, but they're sustaining their boundaries and an image of being a family. And so they're doing it, you find a lot of conventional communication, what we call conventional communication going on. That is, it's not disclosing, it's not,
It's just like
genuine openness.
Very shallow.
Surface.
It's very surface shallow, right? Even the very first scene, they're driving home in the car from the play, and he sort of dozed off. And she asks him in a very loving, wifely way, well, what were you thinking about? And like, tell me, open up to me. And he says, oh, nothing. Right? And you would expect that she would have pushed that issue. But she didn't. She just dropped it.
Yeah.
And she moved over next to him and hugged him.
Yeah, it's very awkward.
But there was no more conversation, right? And that's all those conversations. Every time they go beyond the conventional, they end. Someone withdraws. And that's a sign. So this is a family in stress because it's not, it's maintaining an appearance of getting by, and it's keeping the whole family together, so the boundaries are intact. It's going through the motions in terms of role responsibilities, etc. People are doing their jobs, maybe not doing them to the max. The husband is a financial guy, and his job is sort of his job performance is starting to drop. We hear that, but he's still going to work, and she's still taking care of the home, and they're still maintaining their connections to the community and the country club, and he's still going to school and competing on the swim team. All those things are intact, and in some ways, some instrumental kinds of goals are being attained, but all that emotional stuff is not there at all. And so that's that sign of that strain, and they can't let it up because they would all fall apart.
Yeah,
At least they perceive that. And that keeps them we'll just get by. And so they've adopted the idea of coping without adaptation, and that's their biggest problem, right? And that's what Calvin wants. He wants to confront these things. But he doesn't, he's afraid to, isn't he?
Yeah.
Because he's afraid the whole thing will break. Do you think they were a very close family to start with?
That's what I was wondering while I was writing my paper. As there's not. You see some ideals that are strong, they have dinner and stuff, but I can't see that one member making that big of a difference. I don't know how to explain it, but I know losing a member changes a lot of things, but it's not like they were super together before, is what I think.
Yeah.
You see some glimpse of them running around their dad or whatever in their sweaters and that, but then you see Bucky and it's talking to his mom, and it's his mom's looking at him like he's a god or something,
Right.
So I still kind of get that she was closer to Bucky before than to Conrad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's an imbalance in the closeness.
Yeah.
But I get the sense that they were really close before.
They took their family vacations.
They took family vacations, and even the sign between Bucky and that scene between Bucky and his mom. Conrad's there. Calvin's there. They're together as a family. I think they looked inward to such a degree that when this happened, it made it very difficult for them to talk about it amongst themselves. They may have been overly connected in some degree. On the other hand, the family had a lot of autonomy,
Yeah, they did.
right?
Yeah.
Like you, Conrad, you make the choice of whether you go to a, no one's telling you what to do. You have your own private space, had their own bedrooms, had that freedom to make decisions.
To do what he wanted, like with like meeting the girls or taking the girl out to a date. He
Mhm.
was very, he didn't like have a certain bedtime. He
Yeah,
was able to just come and go as he pretty much pleased.
right. So on the other hand, then that would argue that they weren't quite as cohesive as Olson might say. That they might not be enmeshed, but maybe a slightly.
Would you say that that would change because of the death of his brother? Like maybe it wasn't as autonomous before, and then the only reason it was now is
Yeah.
because there's so many separate things going on, and that they just didn't really pay attention to him anymore.
Yeah, I thought maybe that would be the case, and actually, in my notes, I think I wrote, high level of connectedness that then sort of fell to the wayside, and they no longer were doing so. They struggled to kind of have that connection.
Yeah, because Beth, I mean, like, she talked about with Calvin, like, oh, let's just go on a vacation, just us. You
Right.
know, like, so, and stuff like that. And when they went golfing, wherever they went, like, it was just them. Like, they sent Conrad to his grandma's house or something, so I didn't.
Yeah, but I don't think they would have done that before Buck died.
Yeah.
No, because she even suggested like for Christmas a family thing in London, like, oh, a family thing in London, like, let's go. And like she included Conrad in that, but then it was kind of like after that fight that they had, she's like, I don't really want anything to do
Yeah,
with
yeah,
him. Like it was really sad when they were in Houston, and
Mm-hmm.
you can just kind of tell like the tension that's between Conrad and his mother when she talks to his dad, and he's like, I'm gonna call him tonight, and she's like, do you do that just to annoy me, or is it just out of habit? And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm gonna call my son. Like, and it was just very, very cold and very like unmotherly.
That, and when they were taking a picture, like, that whole picture scene where she was just, like, annoyed, and it almost killed her to, like, take a
Yeah.
picture with her son. Like,
Mhm.
she diverted it right away, and then he snapped, of course, but I don't know, like,
Yeah, I think over time, this resentment built up between the two of them. I'm not sure it was always there from the beginning, because we don't really see it earlier in the movie, but we see it really happening over time as the movie develops. We get, I mean, there were sort of some attempts of approaching each other that were awkward and didn't work out very well. And then there were some actions taken that wound up creating personal offense. And in that way, that's why I'm kind of thinking that they would probably wind up on more of an enmeshment scale before this happened, because there's a sense of people intending, through their actions, not considering what those actions mean for the other family members. And so his quitting the swim team was taken as a personal affront. And it shouldn't have been considered that way, but she took it that way. So maybe there was, it may have been that they might be a little bit overly enmeshed, I think, before it all began. And then after the death, then the source of that enmeshment probably was always through Buck, right? So he had this imbalanced affective structure. You got a strong parental coalition, seemed to me. The husband and wife talked about the decisions with regard to the children. They kind of made the decisions. And it seemed like there was a pretty strong sibling subsystem. Buck and Conrad seemed pretty close.
yeah, even that, I can't remember his name, but one of his friends, when he got in the car, he said
Yeah.
we were all best friends.
And he says, I can't even see you, because
It's too painful.
it's too painful, because they had such a strong relationship, right? And then where it got out of balance before the death was the relationship between Beth and Buck. Right? That was a parent-child, maybe not as much a coalition. They weren't working against the other family members, But it certainly was a parent-child subsystem that was different and set them aside and wound up leaving the husband and Conrad kind of to the side a bit. Although it seemed to have a strong marital system for the most part. Even during the problems, they seemed to love each other, right? Did you get that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can kind of see that at the end. Like, she kind of is very, like, kind of surface and doesn't really talk about, like, her love. And then you, like, see it at the end when he's like, I don't know if I love you or whatever he says to her. And she, like, breaks down in the bedroom. And you're like, that's the most emotion that you see out of her the entire movie. So you can tell that they were really close. It was just not what they, I guess, what he wanted anymore, what he needed. So it was kind of, yeah.
Good observation there. So when Buck leaves and he's gone, and there's no recognition that he's gone, so that's that failure to recognize. That's that boundary ambiguity, right? Buck was always the avenue between Conrad and the mother. Now he's gone. But he's not recognized as being gone. And so there's no repair of that triangular system, right? That triad. It doesn't get worked out. And that's that tension there. There's also another parental-child coalition later, right? It's
Calvin
and Conrad, right? And so then Beth starts feeling ganged up on. And isn't that his problem? That's Calvin's problem. How do I resolve this problem? How do I resolve this issue? Because if I do anything to help Conrad, it's taken as an affront by Beth. If I do anything to support Beth, then I'm ignoring my son Conrad. How do I do both? And he's stuck. But he gradually starts to build the coalition with Conrad. And that becomes oppositional to Beth. And that feeds into a lot of her resentment of Conrad. She then comes to see him as pulling her husband away from her. So it's a really difficult, complex system problem of, remember we talked about the levels of understanding? You remember the second one, the relational, how relationships play off of other relationships. And you can see that in this family dynamic. Some of the problem is these individuals dealing with their grief. But some of the problem is, while they're dealing with their grief, managing those systems of dyads that where any kind of movement of a member who shared in two different dyads towards one creates resentment in the other, and that really freezes the family, and it can't operate. Because the person most capable of making a change is the husband, but he really can't because he's locked into these two systems of relationships.
The way that I kind of viewed it as, like, when we were talking about, like, subsystems and boundaries, it was like, there's a very open circle over here with Beth and Conrad, or not Conrad, Calvin, like, they're touching, and then Calvin and Conrad are, but Beth and Conrad are nowhere near any levels of communication at all, with a giant thick circle around them as, like, their family boundary, because you can't really, they don't really talk about it with other people.
And they can't go outside, right? So that's another, so that, and we would bring in Beaver's idea of centrifugal versus centripetal. They're pretty centripetal. It's like when they had the crisis, they're looking inward. They're not allowing anyone to see in, for the most part, until eventually with the psychiatrist. I think that's where it starts to.
Yeah.
That's when they start to make things happen.
Well, even then, when like the psychiatrist does come in, Beth makes a comment where they're at the food court or something, where she's like, "This is my family, and you know, like
we can deal with these issues on our own.
Yeah,
like
you
we
know.
know what's best for our family."
yeah."
Like,
Yeah, good. The external boundaries are really closed off in this family. I don't know. At some level, they are. There's kind of a freedom for Conrad to go outside the home. There's not close monitoring him, but he's in high school, so you would expect them to have that anyway.
Yeah, they do make the comment that, like, at one point I remember, like, what have you been doing,
Mhm.
through this, I mean, they don't stop it or anything,
Right.
but they do make,
Or inquire anymore. He just says stuff.
Yeah.
I'm around.
yeah,
Like that's an okay answer.
mostly library or, wherever, so.
But they're trying. They have a sense that you need to stay with the family, be loyal to the family.
Because you can see throughout it, he doesn't talk to anybody else about like the family issues, how he feels towards Buck, if he's lonely about his suicide. Like the first person he talks about with his suicide is a girl he took on the first date.
Yeah.
And they're at the line eating a burger.
Yeah, I thought he would talk to, like, his group of friends. Like, I thought he was going to break down at one point. Well, even when they were, like, fighting, or whatever,
Yeah,
I thought he
yeah.
was going to break down and just say, like, he was struggling, but he didn't even say it to the kid that was in the car.
Yeah, almost a disloyalty, although it's a little bit confused because that kid was a close friend of his brother's.
Yeah, so it was...
But even when they were outside the family, he was with his brother, it seemed, all the time, right? They were three close friends. And so that still was, the family was still there, through the sibling.
Maybe that was another one where it was like Buck was keeping them two as friends as well, and it wasn't Conrad and the guy as friends. It was just.
Although the guy liked Conrad and had the connection with him, but
Yeah, he stood up for him, at times.
but Conrad couldn't manage to sustain that, right? Possibly because he was dealing with the issue with Buck and his feeling of responsibility. So that's his psychological absence. He's not just psychological absent from the family, he's also psychologically absent from his peer group, right? And part of that psychological absence, especially with regard to the really close friend, probably stems from his feeling guilty that he was responsible for Buck drowning. So when you feel that way, you don't expose those feelings to people who were close to the person that you would have been responsible for their death. So I think that's his reason for withdrawing from both the family, and particularly Beth, and from the relationship with that good friend. So he was really isolated in that regard. Other examples of where boundaries are being shut or maintained.
Well, I mean, with their group of friends, that they go to that dinner party, and Calvin tries to talk to the lady that's sitting on the stairs about, like, he doesn't even, like, talk about that Conrad's going to see him because he's still not, like, mentally cured. He just kind of says, oh, he's going just to talk and blah, blah, blah. And then Beth comes over, and you can see her, like, looking at him like, what is he going to say? Like, I don't know if I want anyone else knowing this. And she comes over and, like, totally interrupts the conversation, and it kind of just like shuts off like any other person that he could have talked to about it. It's like, and then the conversations that they have are very superficial with all the other people. Like they don't know what's going on, but they're supposed to be their friends, and you can kind of see that they have no one close.
His friend at work, he can't tell him. There's a sense that you can't do it, and it's a very strong ethos in this family, right? It's a very strong part of who they are. And so part of the philosophical system of this family is it's private. Family is private. We keep our problems to ourselves. And that is one way of sustaining those. And sustaining those boundaries is part of that, right? Not letting people in, not letting people see inside. Even professionals, like a psychiatrist. Like as you said in the food court. No, I'm not going to tell my family secrets to some stranger. There are our problems, right? Okay, how about affective responsiveness in this family? Let's put it into two parts, before the death of Buck and afterwards. We don't see too many glimpses, but we have a few.
There's the scene where they're running around with the sweater, and you can kind of tell that the dad, he's not angry at them, like he's trying to solve the problem, and like, is this his sweater? And then they're very kind towards each other, even though the boys are running around screaming. And you can kind of see that there's like a mutual level of respect, like, yeah, it's his, but I'm wearing it now. And so it wasn't really, they were very kind towards each other.
Yeah. You think they responded to each other's emotional needs? That there was a real emotional closeness?
Yeah.
It's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, but I
Because you
mean,
don't see any opening up to each other beforehand.
but even in that scene when they're running around, like it was very easy for Buck to just be like, okay, well, as long as you give me this back, and then Conrad was like, okay, like, if you're not really close to someone, or you can be like, well, I'm wearing it, like
Yeah.
you're gonna kind of like be a little bit pickier about it. I feel.
Yeah, it seemed like a fairly open family
Mhm.
in many ways with regard to affection. And afterwards, we don't see any, right? We see people opening up and getting shut down.
Oh yeah, just door slammed in their face and
Right.
just like not being heard or
Mm-hmm.
anything.
Yeah. Except somewhat between father and son.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And a little bit sometimes between the mother and the father, too.
Yeah.
There's some scenes where he says things or he cries and she comes over and comforts him, really.
Yeah, like in the
when he's like-
garage, like she hugged
Yeah,
him, but
she hugs him.
but
She knows exactly what he needs.
yeah, but I feel like I looked at it like it was almost like not a pity hug, but like a conversation ending hug. Like I'm
done with this.
I'm gonna give you this so that you can just be
Yeah,
okay.
uh-huh.
and move on.
Yeah.
Now that you've said your thing, it's
Yeah,
done.
It's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
and we're not going to talk about it.
Mhm.
Yeah, because if she
Yeah.
really
Oh, that's a
wanted,
good observation. Yeah.
to talk about it, she would have been like, "Well, isn't how I feel?"
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
she was just like shutting him, and he's like kept pushing, and she just like
Mhm.
tried to keep shutting down.
Yeah,
It's like
she tried walking away, and he
Yeah.
was just like, "No."
Mhm.
he's like, I need to tell you this, like
right.
this.
And she stands with her back to him
Mhm.
against the door.
Like, yeah, it's like.
Yeah.
Interesting.
gross.
All right, good. What about the context of this family? So let's sort of back off and talk about, well, this external context. How does the external context play a role in their ability to handle the stressors that they're facing? What was the cultural context about?
Well, as far as they're like a white upper middle class.
White upper middle class, and so what is that? And more specifically, what kinds of values and beliefs played into their situation that made it more difficult for them to deal with the stressor events?
Oh, as far as like, are you talking about like them having? I don't want to say like the American family, but like they valued like what their family looked like.
Right.
Mhm.
This idea of that family privacy is important and the image of the family is important is stemming from the community in which they live.
Mhm.
You get the sense, right?
Yeah,
That families should be perfect.
yeah.
Everything should be perfect. The lawns are perfect. The houses are perfect, right? It was the image of the houses. They're like, oh, I could live there.
It
I
was
could live there. I could live
huge,
there.
yeah.
And so a very strong sense of this perfection, this living up to a standard, both in terms of your family life and also economically.
Yeah.
There's seemed to be a high value in this community on material things,
Mhm.
belonging to the golf club, the country club, with a little sweater with a little patch. I don't know if you saw that little jacket.
But it was very ironic to me that even though they had like those things, they had one car.
Did they only have one car?
Yeah, because Conrad had, like, when he was driving his girlfriend around, he had that car. And then the mom has to take a taxi at the end of the...
But she was leaving.
Yeah, but if you were leaving, would you take a car?
For some
Maybe.
reason,
Like, I just thought that was very,
I think they did it. I'm not sure they had one car, but they may have. But
very...
I think the taxi was a symbolic representation.
Oh, okay.
I'm leaving.
Then that makes sense.
adios,
Huh?
adios.
Yeah, I mean, she's breaking all connection.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I
when she's
guess,
driving
yeah.
away in the car, the family car, how do you get the... Like, if she drives away from the car, you're going,
Yeah, I gotta get that back.
Yeah.
she went shopping.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
She goes off on a taxi,
Gotta go. Yeah.
kind of
Uh-huh.
separating. What else in the community? What other kinds of values and beliefs or perceptions or understandings factored into their ability to deal with these events, particularly Conrad's problems?
Well, as far as his dad having like a really good job, I mean, he was able to pay for him to.
Okay, that would be the
Okay.
the economy, right?
Right.
So where he's located in the economy is he's pretty well situated. So that would factor, the family's economic position would factor into the availability of resources. It also factors into the kind of community where they live, that they have very good psychiatrists who live there, who that they could purchase the services of. I mean, try finding a psychiatrist like like Judd Hirsch. I mean, you can't get a better psychiatrist than Judd Hirsch. He's made a living playing the role. No, but you know, this idea that he's good at what he does. That is something that's available to them that's not available to a lot of other families that might be experiencing a similar situation. Probably wasn't available to the other girl who had a much clearer working class kind of background given her language. You remember that scene in the restaurant between Conrad and I can't remember her name? Karen. And did you get the sense that she was speaking another language, in another dialect?
Yeah, a little. Yeah.
It was kind of hard because Conrad didn't say a lot.
Yeah.
And it was just, they were so awkward in the ways that they kind of viewed their life. Like, he was more like realistic about what he really wanted. He's like, I wish I was back in the hospital. Like, it was easier. I could deal with all these things. Like, there wasn't so many, and it could also be like based on their family structure. Like, maybe her family was a little more receptive to what she needed, but it was just kind of like, she's like, no, life's great. It's great. It's awesome. And was just kind of like very happy and wasn't really like looking at what was going on. And he was more like, this is not working.
Yeah, I got the sense that she probably didn't have the kind of resources that his family had. You know, certainly the psychiatrist would have been very expensive, and there probably would have been a sense that you just need to suck it up and be happy.
Yeah, I didn't notice as much of like her dialect as I did her clothing, which is really weird. I know, like.
So what did you get from her clothing?
I immediately thought like middle class, like lower maybe, just because I felt like when he was taking that other girl out or whatever, I felt like she was a little bit more like cleaned up, you know, like
yeah,
a little bit.
I thought so too.
Just a little bit.
The thing that I've kind of found ironic, in high school I took like this class where you look at all these like symbolic features. The two girls kind of looked similar. Yeah. And so it was kind of, to me, it was kind of, I felt she was maybe a little middle class as well, because you also see her in jeans. And in the Conrad's family, you never see the mom in jeans. She's always in slacks or khakis or something nicer.
That's true.
So it was just kind of like.
And she certainly didn't have as big a house.
No.
I don't think. It was a much smaller house.
It was way smaller, yeah.
Completely different neighborhood.
But so I think that economic position really empowered them to solve their problem to some degree. And other things being equal, they would have been in really great shape. But there were other things that I think, especially in the cultural area of their community, that really kind of prevents them from taking advantage of that economic position.
Yeah, one other thing I noticed about the cultural, like Conrad mentions that he doesn't believe in God. And so I think that that's kind of something that limits their family's ability. Like, they had no external, like, groups or...
Yeah, that would kind of fall in the philosophical side of things.
Okay.
And I'm not sure whether they're a Jewish family that practices Christian holidays, or if they're a Christian family living in a predominantly Jewish community. You know, there seem to be some interesting disconnects there. Because she makes the comment about the Jewish doctor, you know, that is he Jewish? His name is Berger, and I get the sense that they are Jewish, but I only have that sense because the author is Jewish. The author of the story is Jewish, and Lake Forest would be probably a pretty Jewish community, I think. I'm not certain about that, but then practicing Christmas. You know, and having the Christmas tree, and
I also feel like that's part of like how
and
they
his
fit
statement
in,
about
though.
not believing in God, how they fit in.
Yeah, because I mean, like, I think that, like, you know, that's just such like an American thing to do. Have a Christmas, go to, you know, Christmas parties, you know, like for them going and mingling with other people, that was like their thing. You know.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if they didn't celebrate Christmas, people would be like, well, yeah.
Yeah, so what would their transcendent values be from a philosophical point of view? Maybe not too strong, but if there are some, it's all tied to being middle class, which doesn't really direct you anywhere, right? It's not like doing good things for other people, or so they're probably weak in that regard, which is hurting them. But that's their own philosophical culture. That's the culture in the family. I'm talking about our glimpses of the culture outside the family, because there's lots of them. We see lots of attitudes that really get in the way of them being able to take full advantage, in particular, full advantage of the psychiatric services that they can afford and that that they have access to. How does this community think about mental illness?
Oh,
I think they look down on it.
yeah, it's frowned upon.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
What does the coach say? Do you remember that conversation between Conrad and the coach about him being in the hospital?
Oh yeah, did they? I wouldn't let people shock
Wouldn't
my
that
brain
shock my brain.
or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, it's probably something that like their community outside like has never experienced, so they don't know what like you have to go through to like be okay, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
since it's something they don't understand, it's something that they're just not
Mhm.
going to deal with or like look into, you know.
Yeah, I think the real, and this is a problem not just for them, but for other families dealing with a mental illness issue, is the lack of community understanding about mental illness and about psychiatry and services for those who have mental issues that they're confronting. That these families wind up being denied access to what normally would be other resources they could lean upon. This is a family with lots of connections. Right? They have lots and lots of friends. But they can't, they feel like they can't talk about the psychological problems of their kids because nobody understands it. People kind of...
Yeah, and I think just from like what I see, like people think it's self-inflicted,
Uh-huh.
and so they're like, well, you have this problem because you did it to yourself. It's like, no, I'm going crazy because something else happened,
Yeah, and I actually put that down. I actually put that down as a second kind of element. Besides their lack of understanding of mental illness, this is a community that has such a strong ethos of personal responsibility, right? That you're responsible for your place, and that really is something that so Conrad's the one that has to fix it. And that filters down, that then filters into the ethos of the family itself, right? We're going to send him away to the hospital. They'll fix him and send him back, and he'll be okay. And if he's not, it's his fault. And I think that's part of what's in that community too, this sense of personal responsibility.
I think another thing, I just thought about this in terms of like what money can buy, but I feel like since this community, these people have they have money, I don't want to say they buy their happiness, but they have the availability to do that they think that they can buy like a cure, like buy to fix someone,
Mm-hmm.
and so if it's not perfect, then
Yeah,
it's foreign
a
to
little
them.
bit.
I don't know, maybe that's kind of...
Well, they're probably used to purchasing what they need to fix things. And again, factored with the lack of understanding of mental illness, and probably a very high expectation that institutions should do what they're supposed to do, fix the things that they're designed to fix. In this case, the mental hospital certainly he should have come back fixed.
I know, like, we didn't talk about this, but when there's a part in the living room where Conrad and his dad, and I think Beth's in there, like, saying, like, that she didn't come see him at the hospital at all.
Uh-huh.
And,
gosh.
like, saying that, like, she had the flu or whatever, and he was like, oh, it's because she was in, like, Portugal.
And it was like, whoa.
So, like, I don't know where that fits in with a lot of stuff, but I thought it was kind of funny. I was like, oop, she's been called out.
I think that
Yeah.
was like the boundaries. Like they didn't have that connection. They didn't have that. She just didn't feel the
Like,
need
yeah,
of
she didn't have
effective
that support
involvement or
or-
anything.
That's where I kind of, like, saw her as, like, being a problem.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah, but again, it's, I don't want to fix it on her because she's undergoing tremendous grief, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she's trying to manage her grief by keeping everything as stable as it could be. Now, you could fault her for putting so much emphasis on what other people thought of her. And that's probably why she didn't go to the hospital, right? Because it wasn't an acceptable thing. And so those belief systems get in the way. You know? And probably her own parents' belief systems too.
Yeah, they seem to be a big factor in her.
Yeah. So on a developmental level, we have the family that she grew up in, which seems to be very much like the one that she has.
Yeah, I was gonna say, did she come from money? Because
Well, they seem to have, the
Yeah.
grandparents seem to be, financially well off. And we don't see a lot of that, her parents' family life. But we hear some of the same kinds of expectations that probably were held for her when she was growing up. So she brings them to her parenting as well. And so that's handed down from generation to generation. Also, developmentally, is Buck being the firstborn. And so this happens at a time where that facilitated the development of that relationship. And then when he dies, then because he was the firstborn and Conrad was the second, that probably puts I'm trying to think of a way to fit developmental in here because we don't see a lot of it, but that would be an example of a developmental context factor. That they had this previous history that came about because Buck was the firstborn, developed that strong relationship with the mother. Conrad came along and he becomes connected more to Buck, and he's connected to Beth through Buck. And so that pre-existing kind of relationship, you could almost figure to be a developmental one. And then when Buck dies, that's a condition that causes a lot of problems now in terms of the family making an adjustment. Another cultural factor is the view of psychiatry, right? There are two possible views in this community. One is, well,
The father
like-
says it. I don't believe
Huh?
in it. The father says it when he goes there. I don't believe in
people don't
psychiatry.
believe in it. It's quackery. Or it's kind of cool to have a psychiatrist, like the wealthy.
yeah, like it's something you can afford. So
It's something you can afford.
Yeah,
But in neither case is it one that says a psychiatrist helps anybody, right?
right.
It's either a worthless waste of money or it's a way to demonstrate your coolness in the community, but it's not something that's meaningful. And we see in the movie an example or presentation of psychiatry as being extremely useful and valuable.
Well, yeah, even when the dad says he doesn't believe in it, he still continues to talk
He
to
still
him.
continues to talk
And
to him.
I think like he makes steps ahead of where he was, because
Yeah.
he's actually starting to confront how he
Right.
feels and like things that are going on in the home.
Mm-hmm.
He starts to see, what's going on between Beth and Conrad.
Yeah, it's not that he never saw it, I don't think. I think he always saw it, right?
Yeah, he just didn't really know.
But he
about
gets
it.
it validated. And it's the first place that he can get it validated. And that's sort of the strength of the family as a cultural unit, as a symbolic place, because he needs Beth to be on board in order to deal effectively with Conrad's problem. But he can never get her to recognize that his perception is correct. And the good thing about the psychiatrist is he's not involved. So he's able to help him with that. And so now he says, okay, I have an ally, I have someone who verifies what I'm thinking. And that kind of gives him the courage then to confront Beth with the realities. But he's afraid to, because he's afraid it will break up his family. And in the end, it kind of does, right?
Yeah, but I think it was.
Necessary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, philosophical system. So how does that then factor down into the internal context? So as I said earlier, the view of psychiatry, the view of personal responsibility, those all wind up being brought into the family, right? But then there's some other things that this family's philosophical context, in other words, their cultural context, is getting in the way of. And so, so the belief in individual responsibility, um, material possessions, lack of belief in psychiatry, those all were already present in the cultural context, and they're part of the everyday family life. But then when it comes to recognizing and developing perceptions of their situation, that philosophical element gets in the way there too, right? So do these people, first of all, there's no shared understanding of their situation, is there?
Mm-mm.
They don't really have a sense of, oh, this is who we are. Mm-mm. Do they have a sense that we work as a family? Not really. They're struggling to kind of keep that alive. So there's a lack of consensus of the reality that they face. There's a myth of normality that they've created, that we are normal, that we are okay. Now, not everybody completely shares in the myth, but it's the myth of the family. It might be driven by Beth, but it is the myth that is sustaining the family being together at that time.
I also thought, I put this in my paper, but I don't know if
Uh-huh.
I put that like there's a myth that Beth hates Conrad, because I see
Yes.
it get brought up like it's not, she doesn't hate him, it's just like it's something that was created because of her actions, but like and how they respond to each other. But like she even said like, I don't hate my son, you know, or who hates their child or something at the golf course when she's talking about brothers.
Right.
So I don't, like, for him it's like mom hates me, but really, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's not necessarily a family myth. It's a
No.
misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't, yeah.
Because I'm not sure Calvin thinks that she hates
Yeah.
Conrad, right?
Right.
No, because you even said she doesn't hate you.
Right.
Yeah.
But Conrad, well, he just says it once, doesn't he? Why does she hate me? Doesn't she say that?
It
Or
could
doesn't
be
he say
like-
that up in the bedroom?
Mm-hmm. It could be like that thing. Remember how he says to his friend, I can't be around you because it's too painful? Maybe for his mom, like since Buck was their only connection, like it's painful for her to be around him as well.
You're going to be sympathetic to the mom?
Yeah, I know.
It took a while. It's
Yes. I mean, losing a child, that's pretty hard. But I mean, you still have one child left, so I don't know, it doesn't really.
It's really painful for her because because the loss was much greater for her than it was for, well, it was probably pretty heavy for him too. They were the two strongest connections to Buck.
Mm-hmm.
But hers was a pretty special connection, and when she lost that connection, to be around Conrad was almost a disloyalty to Buck in his memory. No?
Yeah. I just always like, whenever I see, like, we talked about it earlier, is that sometimes even in Kirkland, like the loss of the mother brought them together, so I felt like the loss of,
Yeah,
might,
Would hopefully.
might bring them together, but
yeah.
right. But they didn't have the same kind of structure like in Crooklyn.
No, I just was thinking
Right.
like, oh, maybe.
That's why I think that originally they were more enmeshed than in Crooklyn. In Crooklyn, there was that esprit de corps, there was that autonomy and freedom and that looseness in the connection. And in this one, it was so strong. And their lives were so intertwined with each other's. They were so much more isolated from their community. In a way, they were isolated because they were a single family home in a suburb with very strong boundaries erected around for privacy, as compared to Crooklyn, which was wide open. They struggled to keep the boundaries closed, or to close off the boundaries in any way. So probably the case of the mother dying, bringing the family closer together, was a lot easier in Crooklyn, in the family in Crooklyn, than it was for this family. And almost because there was so much cohesion beforehand would be my I guess I'd have to call it a hypothesis because we don't actually see them beforehand. But you get that sense that it was just so close. that changing the nature of the relationships would threaten, in this case, the sense of loyalty to a person who's no longer there. And that's the boundary ambiguity coming in again, right? Physically absent, psychologically, definitely still there. And so any kind of connection with Conrad meant a denial of the relationship with Buck. And so they can't, that's really frozen her in the system. So they don't come together as strongly. They do some things to try to make it happen. But there's such a barrier there because of those ties. What else did I have? I found an interesting thing, and I'm not sure if it's a family issue, but it certainly is Calvin's issue. He tells the psychiatrist that he's always thought himself to be a lucky person. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
You know, and in some ways never felt, that kind of says that he's never, it's a philosophical idea that I'm not responsible for my own well-being. I got lucky. And so that's maybe factoring into a sort of feeling of helplessness. I don't know, but that's more of an individual thing than a family one. Psychologically, well, we already talked about this, definitely decreased capacity within the family. They don't have psychological resources at all. That's one of their biggest problems, right? They've got two members who are completely gone psychologically. They're not functioning on the full scale because of the grief that they're experiencing and guilt. So you got one member of the family trying to fix the whole family. And I don't know, I feel bad for Calvin through this whole movie. It's
Yeah.
Oh, this poor guy, you know? And what is he trying to do? He's trying to make this family work in the face of two members who are really not psychologically capable of talking about the issues that he knows have to be talked about. And then on top of that, he's got, on top of that, he's got one of those members thinking that everything's fine. So where are they going to go? Right? So they're lacking that psychological capacity. On the other hand, they do have some resource that comes about psychologically from his ability to recognize and understand. I mean, he does have that capacity to empathize with both Beth and Conrad in a way that then gets Conrad to go and get psychiatric services. He's seems to me, a pretty darn good parent. And so he's got some skills that ultimately he brings to the table and helps them resolve some of their issues anyway.
Yeah, you can see him like in that pull between two of them in the beginning of the movie when Conrad comes down and his mom's like, "Are you hungry?" And he's like, "No, I'm not hungry." And she like takes the French toast and just throws it, and he's like,
Oh, hold on.
What are you doing? Like, we gotta somehow meet in the middle. And it was all or nothing for either one of them. And you can really see that he is in the middle of it, like from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. So, and then we've talked about the structural, about the way they're organized. They become very fragile. They become very rigid as a means of coping. They become very disengaged as a means of coping. So on Olson's scale, they just go off the charts, right? And they kind of go off the charts in a way that's different from what they were to start with, which was fairly enmeshed and organized, but not rigid by any means in their organization. Okay. Anything else you got
Well,
that you
this
want
is
to talk about? Yeah.
just one of my little symbolic notices. Do you notice that Beth and Bucky, B&B, and then C&C, like of the double ABX model? And then you can kind of see it, like I've been looking at it, and it's
I
like...
was just crazy.
No, and then you it's the CC is the perceptions of the initial event, later impacts, and you can kind of see them at the end, like creating that connection at the end. That was my little...
I thought I was crazy.
No, I was like, oh.
I don't know if Jude Guest was ever a student in any family science class at the University of Minnesota, but she's from Minnesota and she probably did take court. I bet you she went to the University of Minnesota. She wrote the book, and and the University of Minnesota is where the double ABCX model
So I
got
was wondering
developed.
if just like, yeah, if that had like any connection to their names, because I'm like,
I would have never said that in class. I was like, these people think I'm crazy.
But you noticed too?
It's like, these people are going to think I'm a psycho.
I'm making things up.
You know,
Going
I could
crazy.
see her sitting down and deciding to name Beth and Bucky
That's how
with
it
a
started it
B
off.
because of a connection, and comparing that to the connection between Calvin and Conrad as the C's. I don't see her tying it into the double
See,
ABCX
I know, and I
model.
didn't either. And I'm looking at it now, and the kind of the BB is like the resource secured after like crises, like finding additional job, development of network. But then the CC is the perception of the initial event. And Calvin and Conrad are the ones that go back and reevaluate everything, and kind of the ones that you see is like the ones that are making it all go.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I know.
But good use of the ideas.
Thank you.
So, good. So, hopefully you can get a sense of how you can use these models to kind of understand the things people are going through, and using a systems perspective, because it's, like you say, when you came in, I really hated Beth.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
it's her fault. But it's not really her fault.
It's not 100% her fault.
It's a problem of a system not being able to adjust to something that happened. And as a result, members becoming psychologically disabled, in a sense. That we don't know what this family was like. It didn't seem like a bad family. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just the circumstances around it at the time. But it wasn't a family that was organized in a way that was capable of making the right adjustments so they didn't experience the stress. There was something missing in terms of their ability to create a shared perception, to talk about the issue around Buck and his death and what that meant in terms of what they were going to be as a family going forward. Some of it may be because of a lack of resources in other areas, like what do I talk about? I just lost it. My chain of thought. It may have been organizational resources that were lacking. That it was just that they were so together, that there was such a boundary around the family that they never had that opportunity to kind of deal with the issue of the grief. And they may have been overly, like I said, overly enmeshed. And the boundaries may have been too great around the system such that they couldn't access the help they needed at the time. And so they never talked about it. Or it could be that they didn't have good communication. There just lacks some things lacking in communication in terms of their ability to talk about the issues. But we don't really know because we don't see them beforehand. By the time we see them, they're a mess. And so they may have been good communicating beforehand, but certainly weren't at the time. So that inability to kind of make the adjustment then led them to experience stress, which then led them to cope, because they chose the coping path and they never fully pursued it. They never got to adaptation until the very end, when, because of the ability of the husband to kind of push that psychiatrist and helping and getting the resources available to the son to work out his issues, that then transforms the family's capacity to do something different and have the courage really to say, it's okay that we're not a family. We'd be, like you said, we'd be better off not being a family than living like this. The coping isn't going to work. And there's still the chance that she comes back, right? She didn't pack up all her clothes. She just went to Houston.
Yeah, she just took one suitcase.
Is that what it is?
Well, she took like a little suitcase and then like a little thing,
Oh,
and I
that's
was
right,
like,
we saw
that's
that.
not gonna fit all your stuff. So
Yeah.
So it's like it's only
Yeah.
a weekend trip.
So she just went to Houston.
yeah, it's for her.
So that's the crisis model. And that was a very good observation. They bottomed out, and now they just need to find what's going to be the new order, in a genuine way, not in a coping way. And part of the coping, by the way, was also that you just notice all the focus on ritual. We'll just have a good Christmas, right?
Like we always did.
Like
Let's
we
just get
always
back to
did.
normal.
And ritual can help sustain a little bit. And I asked myself when I watched the movie this time, I was thinking, gosh, maybe Beth had the right idea. Maybe all this family needed was some time and creating a sense of sanity or togetherness.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if that happened, then Conrad would never have gotten his act together, would he?
I kind of can see now where she's coming from. That like
Mm-hmm.
that was like maybe how she could handle like and cope
Mm-hmm.
and like adapt. But as a family, they couldn't all do that.
Right.
They were
Yeah.
all different, like in different stages.
Yeah, maybe that was like her idea of like reevaluating the family and
Yeah.
like how things used to be and then how it is
Mhm.
now and what they
Mhm.
need to do
Yeah.
to make it work.
So she might not be that grouchy mom we thought she was. She was trying.
All right, Beth, we forgive
I think
you.
she was definitely trying.
But yeah,
I think you're being very unfair to her. Both of you. I think she was definitely trying.
Yeah, now looking at it, I think she was trying.
like I think she was trying, and it just looks so harsh because of the way she's going about it. Like I've dealt with situations like she has before, not death obviously, but like so I can see where she's coming from. It's just
Mhm.
hard to see that when you see a member of their family struggling so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
So
Oh, good. Good. I think we're done. Does you have anything else you want to comment on? Just a good movie for this purpose. Did it help you with the models at all?
yes,
Yes.
Yeah,
hopefully.
it was
say that
really
again.
during the
Hopefully.
movie. It was
We'll
really
see on the exam.
Yeah, it was really good to see. Like you could see a lot of these aspects in the movie, and it was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
that. That's what
Yeah.
they're doing there. These are their boundaries. This is
Oh, good.
yeah,
That's what I want to get you to do.
yeah. It was a good like
If you can do that, then I'm happy.
connection of this and Beaver's model
Yeah.
as well.
And it's like the same thing that we said with the Crooklyn movie. It's not. These movies weren't designed to illustrate these ideas, but they are I think, good avenues to kind of talk about them, and to get some examples of elements of the models that you can then. Oh yeah, I can see that. So it does exist, right? So it's not just boundaries exist. It's no. I saw them. I can see them. You see them in the behavior. You see them in
Yeah.
the expectations that people hold for what's going to happen next, or what other people should do, or what they should do, what's appropriate and not appropriate. Those are all indicators of what the system is composed of, these abstract ideas. So hopefully it did that.